Zap's a king. Zap thing. And the Bitcoin Amigos Friday stream. Energy high, it's like a dream. Music pumps the price higher. Chris, Jordan, Jerry inspired. It's Fat Zap Friday. You might zap less on any other day, but today is Fat Zap Friday. Yeah. Real fat zaps coming in hot, spreading the love, hitting the spot. Yeah. Fat Zap Friday. Yeah. Community loves to show their support. Hype in the chat like it's a sport. Friday stream turned up to 10. Fat lightning strikes again and again. Fat Zap Friday. You might zap less on any other day, but today is Fat Zap Friday. Yeah. Real fat zaps coming in hot, spreading the love, hitting the spot. Yeah. Fat Zap Friday. Yeah. Lightning from your fingertips, like a kiss from orange lips. Zap's a king, Zap's a king. It's a zap thing. Yeah, it's Fat Zap Friday. You might zap less on any other day, but today is Fat Zap Friday. Yeah. Real fat zaps coming in hot, spreading the love, hitting the spot. Yeah. Fat Zap Friday. Yeah. Zap's a king. It's a zap thing. Zap's a king. Zap's a king. Zap's a king. It's a zap thing. Zap's a king. It's a zap thing. Zap's a king. Zap's a king. It's a zap thing. Yeah. Zap's.
It's a zap thing. Hello out there, and we're on the air. Happy Friday, everybody. A little bit early today, as we can see here from Daniel. Yep. Got a different show today. A unique show, you might say. Let's get some light in here. Let there be light. I think it's going to be a different show. I don't know. We'll see. We might have a guest coming on. Time will tell. I sent him the link. If he shows, he shows. If he doesn't, well, it's going to be an interesting show. I mean, we'll be fine, but I think he's going to be here. I told him to come on in about a couple minutes here, so we'll start the show. We'll get into the groove here, and then we'll bring him on. So, how's everybody doing today? Doing as good as Bitcoin? Aliens with a very early morning question here. Jor, what is your opinion on Trump bugging altcoins for the strategic reserve? I don't know. I don't really have an opinion on it, honestly. That's kind of my views on altcoins in general. I don't really care, because as long as we have Bitcoin, none of it matters. People just take a little bit longer to find Bitcoin. That's all. But I haven't seen too much on this yet. I just know that Trump and team have been talking about crypto. They have a crypto czar on the team. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all. I just don't really see the point of it. Like, what's the point of holding Ethereum? It's not a store of value. And nothing else will be. So unless they have like some sort of ulterior plans for it, then I might just be missing something there. But like, it doesn't really make sense to hold any other digital asset outside of Bitcoin for like the long term. So I don't know. I'm interested to see kind of what's going to play out here. And the cool thing is that it's like been talking about and thinking about this for the last 4 years. And we're like 3 days away. So do I think that there's going to be anything major happen like the first day? I don't know. Like Trump's a very unpredictable guy. The only thing that I know for sure is that I do expect him to free Ross very early on. And you know what? I don't think it matters too much what he does on day one. I do think that if nothing crazy happens, like in the first couple of days with Bitcoin, then it'll be a pretty good buying opportunity. But outside of that, who knows? He won't be buying ETH, just US-based crypto companies. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's a whole different story then. If you can buy companies that are going to earn Bitcoin and money for you, then why not? I do foresee a day where between stuff like that, between Bitcoin mining, I think that the US will be, I don't think there's going to be income taxes forever. I really don't. So I don't know the plan. I'm sure they have one. But look at this. We got Rio. Good afternoon from Portugal, Jor. Wow. Love that. Portugal is one of my favorite spots on earth. So welcome. Hey, we got our guy here. Let's bring him on. He's sitting in the lobby here. Ready? Let's introduce our pal, Ted.
Hey, Jor. How's it going, man?
Good. I just realized as you were coming on here that we probably should have done some sort of like sound check or something like that. So we're just kind of hoping for the best, but I can hear you. I can see you. And how's things? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Yes. I'm here in beautiful Copenhagen. It's a typical January rainy, cloudy day, but making the most of it. Completed a big work week and looking forward to the weekend. And I mean, Bitcoin price is pumping. There's been huge news out of the US this week with all these states putting forward proposals for Bitcoin as strategic reserve assets. So it's a good week. And it's like, my perspective is we are living in exciting times, seeing the monetization of Bitcoin. So every week is a blessing in some ways in my mind. Excuse me. I had 2 fillings put in earlier today, and I can finally use the left side of my face again. So that's another.
Well,
benefit.
You're pretty brave, man. If I get fillings, I stay in my house for a while. Never mind, come on a podcast. So good on you, man. Yeah. So this is Ted in Denmark, Copenhagen, and I don't really have a whole lot of an agenda today. We just kind of met each other last week. So I see this more today as just like a talk between a couple of Bitcoiners, talk about some lessons, talk about things we're excited about, and just see kind of where the conversation goes to. So I got some stuff written down here that we can talk about in terms of topics and stuff. Let's start with, I know people usually start with like an introduction or whatever, but we'll go with Ted from Denmark. And tell us to start, what are you most excited about in Bitcoin right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really exciting now is that we are seeing not just institutional adoption, but I think corporate adoption and the nation state adoption. I think those two are going to be the big themes of this cycle. Mm-hmm. And I just think that the quantities that they're going to buy are going to be just orders of magnitude higher than what we as plebs can really afford. So I think it's exciting on the one hand. It's also a little bit distressing in the sense that, the plebs like ourselves, the window to get large amounts of Bitcoin is closing fast. So I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on retail investors. And I think it's, really important that we get the word out there, what you're doing, Jor, communicating to individuals all over the world about the importance of buying and securing their own Bitcoin. It's just important that we get more messages out to make sure everybody can prosper from this.
So how's adoption going over there right now in terms of the average person? It is exciting to me too, countries, companies. This thing won't really go to where we expect it to without them. That's kind of how I see it. And Bitcoin is definitely, it's for everybody. So we can't really decide who gets it and who doesn't. It's just who's the quickest to do it. So, that is the point of the show. I think that's why, that's what motivates a lot of us to get up every morning, is to push this movement forward for the little guy. And that should be our priority. That is a priority. But how's adoption over there? Is it like, if you talk to 100 people on the street, how many people would most people know Bitcoin now, but how many people would have a decent understanding of what Bitcoin actually is?
I don't know the exact numbers, but here in Denmark and Scandinavia more generally, I think there's a lot more skepticism. I mean, there's skepticism towards Bitcoin all over the world, but I do think the myths have been largely more debunked across the general population, or that debunking is perpetuating at a good clip, I feel, in Canada, the US, and many other countries. But I think here in Scandinavia, people are still like, what's the point? My life is good already.
Yeah.
Everything's working fine. So I think they're a little less, there's less pain and pressure from the issues with fiat. So I think, and there's also a lot of trust in the government here. So I think people feel as though their elected officials are spending money more responsibly. The debt to GDP ratio of Denmark is only something like 35%. So it's kind of the fact that they have been responsible spenders is actually a little bit of a drawback, I feel, because now people don't see the importance of adopting Bitcoin as much here. So it feels like it's a lower rate. That being said, a guy reached out to me on X just a couple of days ago, and then we're going to meet up for a beer here. He's another Bitcoiner. So we're going to meet this evening. So there are people, but I feel like we're pretty few and far between.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the opportunity is too. And one thing I want to talk to you today about, Ted, is, but before we get into that, maybe I want to say hi to Zapstream. We're watching on Rumble too. And I got the live chat open here. So again, this is just going to be a good conversation between a couple of Bitcoiners, talk about some experience, some lessons, and just our opinion on a few different things. So if you have any topics or anything you want to talk about or us to talk about, just throw it in the chat. I do see one of the comments here early on was, no, that's not it. Where did it go? Right here, Coinbase. Let's maybe start with this, because I think this is kind of the hot topic today in terms of Bitcoin loans. And surprise, surprise, Coinbase is leading the charge. It feels like deja vu from a couple of years ago. So I don't know. I have a couple different thoughts on Bitcoin loans, but I'm interested to hear kind of what you think in terms of selling versus loaning versus, what's your longer term plan with it?
You talking to me? Yeah. I would, on the one hand, I mean, coming from the traditional financial space, I think, there's always something to be said about earning yield on your assets, right? That being said, with Bitcoin, I feel like there's so many risks. I mean, I've been burned trying to farm a bit of yield on FTX, on Celsius, on these guys. So now I'm much more prudent in the approach I'd take towards saying, is that 5% yield really worth it to be lending it out? What's the security risks? So I'm at the point now where it's all self-custody, multi-sig solutions. That being said, if a solution was to come around that can still satisfy the security aspects and be in kind of one of these, how do you call it, like escrow accounts that isn't a multi-sig solution, maybe I'd be inclined to get the interest rate. But that being said, when Bitcoin's going up on average 40% a year, do I really need that extra 5%?
Right.
I don't know. That's my kind of perspective. What do you think, Jor? What's your view?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think that the people who will be taking out or trying to earn a yield. I actually saw one of the bigger accounts on YouTube. One of the guys I've been paying attention to a little bit. Tech Lead, I think his name is. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. He's got a couple million followers or subscribers, but he was talking about it yesterday with Coinbase and earning yield, and it just sent up so many red flags to me. It just sounded like 2020 all over again with the FTX and Celsius. And from that side of things, like I have no interest in earning yield on my Bitcoin. I don't. It's just not worth the risk to me at all. And I've seen what's happened before. And I think that the people who are getting into that at this stage of the game haven't been burned yet. They're kind of newer to the game. They don't really understand Bitcoin yet. They think that assets are supposed to earn a yield. And that's kind of what their goal is there. But in terms of I am excited about the Bitcoin loans in terms of being able to go to a bank and just like you do with land, you say, here's my Bitcoin. You can hold a key to a portion of it, but give me some dollars because I want to go spend that instead of my Bitcoin. Like that's kind of how I see it in the future. But yeah, I mean, just Coinbase overall, it just seems like really weird timing right now to me. The fact that it's Coinbase, the fact that, I really believe that because Coinbase is kind of like the big player in Bitcoin and crypto, it just seems like there's some paper stuff going around. It doesn't make sense to me in my head that we could see so much adoption and so much demand in 2024 from corporate, from countries Like the big boys are here. And yeah, it went up, but it didn't go up like in orders of magnitude that you'd think it would based on the demand here. So I think that there are some funny games going on here. I don't want to, make any wild assumptions, but it just seems weird that they say, okay, well, now you can give us some of your Bitcoin. We'll give you some dollars or some payouts for it, but we're going to hold that Bitcoin. It just seems kind of like sketchy timing.
Yeah. I mean, just some initial reflections on that. I mean, first of all, I know Gary Gensler was slapping them with these Wells notices on their lend products and stuff back in the day. And
like Coinbase
was out there, up in arms saying, you guys are enforcing through legislation or through, I would say, regulating through enforcement, whatever it was. But now that Gensler's on his way out, I guess and the deregulation that's happening, I guess they're being unbound from those sorts of constraints. So I think that's one kind of thing on the timing. Then on the kind of manipulation of price, to be honest, I don't know. I'm not as inclined to necessarily, without having any evidence to look at, it's hard to know for sure if that's the case or not. I'm also a little bit surprised that the price is not moving as much as you think it would, but the general trend is up. And I do think the big buyers are going to use OTC desks to try to not see too much wild price movements. I think they're going to be sensitive as well to prices and not want to make the market aware that there is a big buyer in the market when they are there. So, and there's miners still, most of the miners still have to put theirs on the market. And I guess there's a lot of early adopters that are happy to cash out and buy some.
Yeah, that's true.
But I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of smart people saying that there's manipulation on the market. But again, I haven't done any analysis, haven't seen it myself. And then your last point, I guess, is on the lend product, like collateralizing your Bitcoin for a loan. In principle, nothing against it. I know there's some interesting startups in the space doing that, and I think it makes sense if it's the right counterparty that I'm willing to take risk with. Coinbase is custodying BlackRock's all the big ETFs, so I think they're seen as a really reliable custody provider. But me personally, I don't know. I think there's still a small part of me that's just saying, what if the US does another executive order 6102 type deal and just goes after Coinbase, says all your Bitcoin are belong to us now, right? So I'm still going to take the self custody in that case. But again, I think it's generally a good sign when the types of products are expanding and the types of offerings. And I think, the banking services are becoming more Bitcoin as the base layer as opposed to fiat. I think that's generally a good trend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that, as Bitcoiners, we all kind of see this world where we all hope that it's Bitcoinization and there's no dollar and there's no lending. But that, in reality, I don't think that's ever going to be the case. I think it sounds like you're in the same boat as that. Where do you, I don't know if you can hear that or not, but like the wind here woke me up at 4:30 or 5 this morning. It is absolutely insane. But anyways, like, how do you see this kind of playing out? Because that's kind of what I have in mind in the future, is using my Bitcoin as collateral and so I don't have to sell it. That's kind of my main reason for that, because I know that I'm never going to get it back, especially at that stage of the game. But what do you think of, like, how do you see this playing out over the next couple decades? I hate talking like short term, like what's going to happen, but like longer term, where do you see it going out yourself from your eyes?
Yeah, no, really good question. I mean, I think my view is evolving as new information comes to light and all that. But I do think that there's going to be a transition period. I believe the end state will be a Bitcoin only world where
really
you have Bitcoin, you might have some sort of derivatives on top of it. But I think the transition is going to be a mutual existence between Bitcoin and fiat. And I think it's going to be nation states, the proactive ones, are going to recognize the game that we're all in, that fiat is crumbling. And if you want your fiat to persist and your power to persist, then you need to back your fiat with Bitcoin. I think that's what we're seeing the US and others start to do now. But then at some point that will also fall, because at the end of the day, the people who are actually transacting in it, why would they ever use this intermediary solution that is prone to corruption if they can just go straight to the source, right? So people would be demanded to be paid in Bitcoin to receive it when they transmit goods and services. So I think there's going to be this transition period. I don't know how long it's going to last. Could be 5 years, could be 15 years, maybe it could be 50 years. I think it comes down to how the rate of kind of global adoption, and also how long governments can kind of like cling to the power that they have in terms of the monetary system. So I think all those factors are at play. But how do you see it?
Yeah, I would say I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't know if we'll see a hyper Bitcoinization world in our lifetime, and I mean, hopefully we still got a lot of years left. But I agree. I just think that the people at the top are going to have a very hard time letting go of that power. I think that it was kind of inevitable, even without Bitcoin. Like it probably would have just with the internet and with how everybody's connected now and the information that's out there. I do think that their power and influence would have shrunk over time, but Bitcoin's really going to accelerate that. And I don't think it would have lasted without Bitcoin. I think it might have been kind of shorter term. Yeah, we get rid of the central bank, something else comes up. We promise we won't do it again. And then it happens again in 25 years or 30 years. So everything in life is cycles. I honestly do think that this time is different in history. I think that Bitcoin is the fork in the road that kind of changes everything. And just like when they took the gold off of the standard, that's when there was another fork. And most people didn't really understand what was happening there. I'm sure a lot of the people who were alive at that time would reflect on that and say, yeah, I saw it. I kind of like it would stun the world, but I didn't really know the implications of it. And looking back 50 years now, it's pretty clear to see what happened there. You can look at every aspect of society and see how much it's deteriorated since we went off of the gold standard. So I think that we're kind of living through the same time right now in terms of most people don't really understand what's happening. 90% of the world will never fully understand Bitcoin, and it doesn't really matter. But I do think that the fork has been made. And I think we're going into a much better world because of that. And people are just going to see the benefits kind of secondhand to that.
100%. Totally agree. And Bitcoin's a one-way street, right? There's no turning back.
Right.
Genie's in the bottle.
It's true.
And once people move their wealth into it, I mean, there are some traders that move wealth in and then move it out, move it in, move it out. But over time, people who become traders, most of them become Bitcoiners, right? And they realize there's no sense pulling out and going into fiat again. And then the more people that move to it, it becomes a tipping point, right? Once people no longer want to store their wealth in fiat, it just deteriorates faster and faster.
Yes.
But the point about 71, I think it is interesting, right? Because I guess in the moment, I think even Nixon himself and his advisors recognized that there was probably they were giving people a bit of a raw deal in doing it because they had to say this is a temporary fix. This is not a permanent thing.
Right.
Permanent. And then you're exactly right. It's the insidiousness nature of this is that it's in any given year, it's not really noticeable, right? But when you zoom out for, as you said, 50 years, 54 years now, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. That's when you can see the huge deviations in the fact that all this unproductive capital that's gone in has ended up in asset prices, has ended up in unaffordable homes, stock price multiples that are way out of whack. And now we actually have this alternative to soak up all that unproductive capital and store it away into something that is finite and productive, and it only will see increased value over time. So it's great for and as you said, for humanity, because now the little guy, people can no longer get screwed by monetary policy, and they have an opportunity to actually not only not get screwed, but actually front run the system right now as Bitcoin gets monetized. So this is as people say, once in a species opportunity almost, right? So that's I think why Bitcoiners like us spend all our waking hours thinking about this, because we're just like, this is absolutely insane that this is going on right now, right? Yeah,
it is, and I think that one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is like every Thursday we've been doing a show called Bitcoin Generations, which is focused on the helping educate some of the baby boomers mostly. Kind of from zero of like, what is this thing? Why you should care about it. And I think that people our age and probably below that, I don't think that they'll ever, how can I say this? I don't think that there's any way around it from us. Like nobody's going to go back and start buying gold our age. Nobody's going to go back and start putting their money into bonds. So I think it's kind of up to the baby boomers, honestly, of how fast this thing goes. Because if they're willing to put some of that, they hold all the capital right now, or the majority of it. And so if they're going to take time and learn it and actually take a little bit of risk here, I don't see a large percentage of them doing it, but I think it's up to them in terms of how fast this thing moves. But then once they're gone, essentially, which is shitty to say because my parents are of that generation, but once they're gone, like then, imagine all the baby boomers leaving their inheritance behind. Do you think that like their heirs and the beneficiaries of that are going to go out and buy gold or buy bonds? Like, no, it's all going into Bitcoin. Because at that point, I think people are going to be much more educated around it. They're going to see the old system crumble even more. And like you said, once you get to that point of understanding that the money's broken, Bitcoin is the best solution to it, you don't ever go back to that. So it is, you said it's a one-way street. It absolutely is. Once you see it, once you understand it, you're never going back to that world. And so it is in that sense inevitable. It's just kind of up to us and the baby boomers, I think, us to educate them, but them to decide what to do with their wealth, of how fast it's going to move.
Really good perspective there on the kind of rate of change, right? I think you're generally correct in that sense. And I think there is, as people get older, first of all, they get more kind of set in their ways, more resistant to new things. But also, when you have a lot of wealth, I think for whatever reason, you're more less willing to take risks, right? When you think
100%.
I think that's the irony, right? I think Bitcoin is the best thing to preserve your wealth. But because it's this new thing, it's perceived as being more risky. It is more volatile right now, right? But the volatility is certainly to the upside. So I do tend to agree with you that, and most wealth managers out there in the world, so for high net worth individuals that and not even, so let's say people are private wealth managers, then you also have like the mutual funds, the managers, those funds, they're only going to have discretion to kind of move up gradually, all else being equal, right? So it'll be something where it's 1%, then 2%, then 5%. So there is a restriction on how fast that can go. I think the other big restriction is, if you look at real estate, I think that's one that is a huge issue because so many people, so much of their value is locked up on real estate. They've leveraged so much wealth against it. They might have taken out second loans and so forth. And if people realize too quickly that real estate is a shitty store of value compared to Bitcoin, and it becomes like a bank run out of real estate, that could just that's just cause so much chaos in the world, right? We saw just an inkling of what that would be like in the real estate crash of 2007 in the US. So it could be something like that times 10. And so I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to kind of make sure this transition happens in a somewhat orderly manner.
Because it could get nasty if it didn't, right?
Exactly, right. You have these people kind of getting screwed over, and they get angry at Bitcoiners because they're like, "You Bitcoiners are ruining my life. My house price dropped by 90% because of you guys." So it has to be done. I mean, thinking about how this can be done in a kind of fair and equitable manner, or what's at least perceived as such, is probably going to be quite important. But I think the thing that can throw flip the whole table on its head, though, is if nation states start printing money to buy Bitcoin simply out of game theory, because these are like still adversarial geopolitical entities. So I think if it does go into that direction, that sends a huge signal to all people who own wealth of all sorts of different types, whether it be in real estate or in stocks or whatever else, gold, that this is the alpha store of value. And that could move things, accelerate things in a much faster way, where even though, people think otherwise would have had resistance, they just see the price is going up so astronomically fast, this hyper-Bitcoinization scenario, and they feel like they just need to jump in. And again, I hope that's actually not the case. I think that would be chaotic and disastrous, and I think perceived as unfair and could lead to a huge amount of conflict. But I think it is a scenario that could happen.
So, I mean, in that case, because we're talking about the fiat dollar here and we're talking about Bitcoin and how different the systems are. But if and when countries start buying Bitcoin and realizing the need to buy Bitcoin, like as this thing starts moving forward, I think that a big part of the next probably 5 years will be in the next month in terms of what Trump announces, the first thing that they do, where they move with this, because the US, I think, is the most influential country on earth. And I think that if other countries start seeing the US buy Bitcoin, it's going to go pretty quick. And I think that countries actually have the ability, especially like some of the countries, I don't want to say like dictators, but the ones who have the ability to move very fast and don't have to have the same process. In this case, it could be a good thing. Like that's kind of what happened with El Salvador, right? Like the president just kind of decided that he was going to start buying Bitcoin, and he didn't have to run it through Congress and Parliament and all these other things. He's just like, all right, let's do it. And it worked. So the question though is that I have is, when that happens, do we still call it a fiat dollar if they're buying Bitcoin to back their currency with that? Is that still a fiat dollar? Or is that like a totally different thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be, in my mind. So first of all, I totally agree with these, let's say more agile types of countries where whether it be a monarch or a dictator or whatever, it doesn't have to run through a system.
Yes,
they have a huge advantage to front run, and they don't have to disclose anything. They don't have to like make a public announcement about anything, right? So I'm sure this is already happening, right? Likes of the UAE, Qatar, Brunei, for sure. And it'll be really interesting when this comes to light, when people start doing diagnostics, on-chain diagnostics, and figuring this stuff out. But on the what do you call that currency if it's kind of like, and I think it's gonna be interesting to see. I don't know, because the question is, how formally are they going to back it, right? I don't really know if they're immediately going to go to a position of actually saying we are indeed pegging our currency to Bitcoin as an asset that we're going to kind of hold in reserve. I think it's going to be more just the fact that they have that as a backstop, that then acts as a floor price to their currency. That's kind of the perspective I have. And then that might become a more formal tie over time. But then I think at some point people will just say, it will just flip, right? Where the unit of account is no longer the dollar, it's actually the Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But that's further down the road, I think. But I don't, I see it as being kind of like a semi-fixed thing, and whether we call it fiat or something else, I don't know for sure yet. It's gonna be a whole new economic textbooks will have to be written on this, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, you said something interesting there that, to me anyways, is that when that actually happens with the fiat dollar, because I think that Trump is actually going to put Bitcoin on their strategic reserve. I think that he's actually going to move it into the treasury. I think that he's going to back a new US dollar by Bitcoin. But we've kind of seen what's been happening with El Salvador. They actually have a website that you can go to and see their holdings. So you can see how much they have at any time. And when you start thinking about the different values, and you said that when we're measuring things on Bitcoin, I don't think it's going to be like an announcement where the newspaper comes out and said the world is officially on a Bitcoin standard, or like we're measuring things in Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is already repricing things, even currencies. And that's why I kind of get confused with, measuring the fiat price. But you can see the price has gone up in fiat, but the price of the value of fiat has gone down significantly compared to Bitcoin. So I think that things are already being repriced by Bitcoin. It's just that most of the world isn't thinking in those terms yet. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what plays out in terms of the countries buying it. But the other thing too there is companies. Right? And that's a big thing that I want to talk, and maybe we'll kind of go there after this. But like, it's the same kind of thing. If you're holding a melting ice cube, and other companies that do less, sell less products and services are starting to do better than you got to take a good look in the mirror and say, what's going on here? And then all of a sudden it becomes this game where countries are doing that with each other. Companies are doing that with each other. That's the game theory there. Yep. But to me, I think that when we're going to see the real value of Bitcoin, when it kind of breaks free, is that when we kind of normalize and encourage them to show proof of reserves, because then people can start doing the math on it, right? When it's transparent, we can see how much there is available versus how much is being held long term. I think that's going to be a big thing in people's minds in terms of just how scarce this thing is, because people say it's 21 million. And if I think it was somebody in the chat this morning, they said we're actually down to about 16 or 17 million by the time you factor in lost coins and some other stuff like that. But again, it's easy to say that. It's easy to just kind of think about it. But when you actually see how scarce this asset is, I think that's going to be a big mind melter for people.
Yeah. I mean, so just understanding, Jordy, you're kind of saying like as entities like nation states and corporations begin disclosing how much they have and reserves, you think that's going to be okay? Because I guess public companies already, I think, have to do that. So
they do on their financials, but they don't actually provide an address that we can look at in the mempool. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah. Because we can verify ourselves.
Let's dive into that a little bit further, because this is an important part of it. And as you know, in my old life, I was an accountant. And so these financial statements, the public companies, all these companies around the world, they have to disclose their investments, their balance sheet, and we have to verify that as accountants. But The thing is, there is that whoever's verifying those financial statements is another human being. And those human beings are susceptible to, breaches of ethics. We've seen it in the past where the statements, Enron, exactly. There's a ton of examples where the financial statements say they have 3,000 Bitcoin, but then, once you actually scratch the surface, they're holding nothing. So the proof of reserves, I think that with Bitcoin, we actually have the ability to see that now. We don't need the third-party verification there from auditors. We can actually just look at a website and see this is the address, this is how much they hold, and then there's no trust required there anymore.
It's a really interesting angle you brought up there. It's something I hadn't really thought so much about, but I think I think it's really interesting. It's still not clear to me that the impact would be that great, but I do understand why it would have a positive impact, right? It would reduce, just as nation states have the ability to kind of they have a potential conflict of interest when it comes to money printing.
Yes,
it gets exploited. Once the conflict of interest is there, it gets exploited. I think there's a similar thing to be said about, financial crime, so to speak, in this regard, fraud, fraudulent accounting practices and so forth.
Exactly. Yeah. And so Bitcoin really just destroys that. It destroys the ability for us to have to trust anymore. Like you look at the Federal Reserve, who's been around for 111 years, they tell us how much cash is out there in the M1, M2 supply, but they've never been audited. So they're not even trying. We're talking about companies here who are kind of fudging their numbers, but the US isn't even trying. So I think that Bitcoin does bring transparency. And I think that once that becomes a standard, once other countries are showing it, El Salvador, once companies start showing it, then it changes everything. Because if you're not showing it, then you're going to be assumed to be a liar.
Yeah, and you lose it'll be an implicit indicator of there being something corrupt under the scenes, and then capital will not flow
exactly
in these types of places, right? It's a really interesting perspective on this idea of ethics and let's say corporate governance, national governance. There's this ability of and I think this is probably at the crux of what will lead to just a more harmonious life and more equal, happier life for most citizens, because you're kind of taking out what is an unethical incentive structure.
Exactly.
Kind of neutralizing it, right? So it's really, really cool.
Yeah, and incentives too is a big one for me, because if we go back to the baby boomers a little bit here, they've been kind of trusting their financial advisors for a long time, the majority of their career. They just went to work. They trusted that their money would be there when they were done work, and they trusted that their financial advisors would be the ones who get them to the 7, 8, 10% return every year. But you have to consider incentives in everything. And I think that when you look at the incentives as a financial advisor to push Bitcoin, it just doesn't really make any sense. Because when you got guys like me and guys like you who are taking custody of that asset, and that's what Bitcoiners would encourage, financial advisors don't make a cut off that. So what would be their incentives to get these baby boomers into Bitcoin if their entire career is built on their money and taking a fee of that every year, and all of a sudden those fees start going away? Meanwhile, the cost of everything else going out. It's just going to be a very interesting dynamic, I think, over the next 5-10 years to see.
Yeah, well, I do think I think at the end state, if it's really just because I think that once Bitcoin standard is in place, Bitcoin is basically just a savings account, and the value will go up. Everything will be measured in Bitcoin. So one Bitcoin will be one Bitcoin. You will never see your account value change, but the purchasing power will grow with that of the overall productivity gains in the overall economy. So that's the end point. But the transition period, so you don't need a financial advisor for that, obviously, right? But the transition point, we're going to have most people probably get their first exposure to Bitcoin through ETFs rather than actual physical Bitcoin. So I think there's lots of room to play for the traditional financial advisor ecosystem for them to also benefit. And that's, again, game theory at their level, right? If you're a fund manager without Bitcoin, you're going to underperform your benchmark. If you have a Bitcoin on, you're going to outperform your benchmark. You're going to get a bigger bonus, et cetera, et cetera.
Very true.
So I think that the interesting harmony is that you kind of have this competition in the old system that then also drives everything towards the Bitcoin standard system with using their own incentives against them, so to speak.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So maybe for the next couple of years, then these financial advisors, once, you know, I think that Trump is going to be an influence to countries, but also advisors. Like BlackRock was a big one, I think, where they saw BlackRock buying. That was like, okay, well, these guys are doing it. I'm still blown away by the fact of just how few advisors are talking about Bitcoin. But they see BlackRock, now they see Trump talking about it. They might feel a little bit more comfortable just having the conversation with their clients. And they probably will push them into either a MicroStrategy or an ETF, something along those lines where they can compete. They can keep their, you know, assets under management continuing to grow. But then what happens after that? What happens when people understand the need to take self-custody and see the real sovereignty in doing that? So I think that they will have a couple of good years here, and the ones who adopted early are going to be the biggest beneficiaries of that. But after that, like, I think the new financial advisor becomes storing Bitcoin and finding ways like multi-sig solutions and training people, or not training people, but like maybe managing people's Bitcoin for them in terms of like, can we allocate some over here where we're going to get a little bit of a yield? You're going to need this month, next month, so we're going to move this to a Lightning wallet of yours. You know, stuff like that. I see that I feel that maybe we're a decade out from that, but that's kind of how I see this myself progressing over time.
Yeah, really fascinating.
That's why it's so exciting to me for guys like me, for guys like you who are kind of interested in working in Bitcoin. The disconnect there is massive when you think about the people who are going to need to know this stuff in the future versus how many people actually have just like a very basic understanding of this thing, never mind like being able to advise companies and people on it. There's just a huge spread there. So just kind of a message for anybody out there. And I'm sorry that I haven't got to a whole lot of comments here and stuff, but message out there to people is just like, just understand the fact that you're putting in a couple hours a day, maybe more, maybe a little bit less, but over time, that's going to compound into something that's extremely valuable to this world. And the disconnect there of like the people who understand it versus the people who are going to need that knowledge is huge. So what in terms of that, like when you and I met last week, we kind of talked about companies and stuff getting into Bitcoin. So what's kind of your role there? What are you excited about? And what's the next couple of years look like for you in terms of helping companies and businesses adopt Bitcoin?
Yeah, great question. So I've been working as a consultant and in corporate strategy in the energy sector as well as in the brokerage sector for the last 12 years. And so I've kind of gotten a pretty intimate knowledge of how corporations work on the inside. Haven't worked intimately in treasury management, but have of course worked with CFOs and corporate treasurers and stuff. But I'm pretty convinced that the direction of travel will be, as you've kind of said, just at individual levels. Right now, 1 to 2, 3% of individuals really understand Bitcoin to a level of seeing where the future is going to go and the importance of holding it as an asset. Mm-hmm. That same trend is going to take place with corporations. I think corporations are a different type of animal in the sense that they are not, it tends to be groups of individuals that have to come to, they have certain governance structures in terms of making these types of decisions that really slow them down, right? And their accounting standards they have to follow and so forth, right? But overall, so I think they've been more constricted than individual humans have been, but I think that will become, the regulatory environments will change jurisdiction by jurisdiction to enable them to do that. And I think there will be this broader acceptance. So there's going to be needs for education at the board level, at the executive management level, at the corporate treasurer level, in terms of why this is important. Ultimately, kind of driving through the support and driving through the acceptance and approval, whether it be a private company or a public company, through shareholder meetings, and then ultimately making it manifest in a way that makes sense. And MicroStrategy has laid out what they call the Bitcoin playbook. I don't think it's necessarily one size fits all, but it kind of lays a little bit of the overall principles. And again, it's taking those principles and applying them to different companies in different contexts to help them understand how much Bitcoin, what's appropriate for you for now, given the other things you could do with that cash, whether it be share buybacks, other investments, capital investments. And then what do you do to secure it? And then I think you bring up another good point. Does it have to sit there and cut in kind of not necessarily do anything in a vault, or can it be used actively as a collateral or something that can provide additional yield? And I think that ecosystem will probably, be further developed over the coming 5-10 years as well. So again, that's kind of my perspective. I think it really starts with education as the starting point. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of interesting companies here in Europe and Scandinavia. So I think getting in front, and I think there's some interesting companies that are comparable to we talked about how UAE, Qatar, they can move faster than the big Canadas and US with parliamentary systems. Here in Scandinavia, we have some equivalents of that with these large family holding companies that are behind some of those massive companies that you've probably heard of, right? Like Lego, Maersk, and others. And they're probably in a position where they can move quickly if the right people on the inside get the right, get orange pilled and really understand it. So that's something that I'm starting to branch out to actually try to get an educational system in place that does appeal to this type of audience, speaks their language, and helps to convey the importance. That's the first step.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, well, I do want to get to the energy stuff. I think that's a major component of Bitcoin that many people are sleeping on. But let's start with like, if you were, actually, before we do that, I want to say a couple shout outs here. It's Fat Zap Friday here over on Zapstream. I see everybody over there. Sorry, I just kind of want to keep the conversation flowing here. But we got a couple Fat Zaps here today. And I see that Kyle M is looking for the QR code. Forgot to put this on the top. So this is the Zap stream for the YouTube. So thanks everybody for the Zaps that have been coming through the Zap stream. And we'll keep this party going here. So if you were sitting in front of a company then in a boardroom, like where do you start? Do you start with like the basic understanding of Bitcoin, or do you like how would that conversation go? I know this is kind of more so like a hypothetical question, but I think it is important for people to, and this might be like a more of a brainstorming thing between you and I, but I'm interested to hear if you were sitting at a boardroom with a company, like where do you start and where do you finish with it? And what are the kind of the main points you would want to portray to that company you're trying to get to hold Bitcoin?
Yeah. Really interesting question, right? So I think it is different. And again, it's probably not a one size fits all because different approaches are going to land with different people and different companies. But with individuals, I think where you meet most people these days is understanding why is it we live in a price inflation world where our wages tend not to keep up with the rising prices, right? That's a problem that so many people face that they don't fully understand. And it kind of ends with, and along the way, it's kind of like, what is money? What makes a good money? Why is our current money not ideal? And why is Bitcoin a more perfect money? And why then does it solve the problem of inflation that we come up to at the beginning? So I think that works well for most individuals. Another way in that I've discussed with people is to start with what is just a more open conversation about what is money and around the dinner table, without necessarily having to put Bitcoin front and center, because that can be, some people have very strong opinions and it can create the wrong reactions. But with companies, I think ultimately you have to kind of come to where their KPIs are, right? What their objectives are as a business and as as individuals within the business, right? What are these individuals' scorecards based on? How do they get their bonuses? So I think it's about understanding those types of contexts. And so it comes down to competitive environment. It comes down to working with KPIs like what is the return on your invested capital? And for companies that are sitting on lots of cash, you can do some quick metrics. What are you making on your money market funds that constitute 25% of your liquid assets right now? How does that compare to inflation rates? Well, you're probably losing, as Michael said, was said as a melting ice cube, right? You're losing value every year in this holding this asset. What other alternatives do you have, right? They're constantly looking at capital investments, but having worked in corporate finance, it's not always easy to find those investments that are expected to be profitable, especially not in M&A space, and especially not at the multiples that we see on the market these days. So what we tend to see is companies will do share buybacks because that's a low risk way for them to boost the share price. Share price tends to be the thing that their multiples are based on. Sorry, their bonuses are based on. So it tends to be this share buybacks, which doesn't really lead to productivity for the overall economy. It really just ends up becoming a way to kind of bolster executives' bonuses and existing shareholders. But it also concentrates shareholder base, which I think is not healthy for a stock either. So I know this is a really roundabout way to say, you know, understanding where what their KPIs are, what dilemmas they're facing, and then seeing how Bitcoin can, you know, looking at historical track record of Bitcoin and why that is a superior treasury asset. Where I'd like to go deeper in the conversations as the education level goes up is to say, okay, beyond just Bitcoin as a reserve asset, what is the, and this is something where the company managers that you're speaking to will have to be orange pilled at this stage, because they'll have to understand what is a Bitcoin standard and why is it inevitable that we're going to get there. But then you can start talking about this transition that we're going to be going on, and how does your company survive and thrive in that transition, given that a lot of things are going to change, not just in the financial system, but in many different aspects, supply chains, the roles of governments, regulation, et cetera, et cetera. So thinking about developing strategies that might be based on, you know, scenario planning and involving a broader group of individuals than just the board and the CFO and treasurers, but actually thinking about the operations, the sales, the commercial side, and so forth. And that's going to be very company by company specific.
Yeah, I think that companies are, I mean, we have to keep in mind here that companies are just a group of people, right? So you have to relate to the people. You have to see what their needs are first. I hope they align with the companies, but they sometimes don't. But the other part of that, I think that just the dynamic itself of like prices continuing to go up, technology continuing to get better, less people wanting to work. You know, some of these businesses are going to face the challenge of they can only raise their prices so much before people just aren't able to pay for it anymore. And so it's interesting to me kind of where Bitcoin's going to fit in the middle of that, in terms of like, maybe if we hold Bitcoin, we don't need to keep like increasing our profits every year. If we focus from the income statement to the balance sheet a little bit more, we can kind of, as our holdings, our balance sheet goes up, that's going to have a kind of a trickle down impact of the rest of the business. Where if we look at things today, most people don't really look at the balance sheet at all. They look at how much was sales last quarter, how much was it last year. They want to keep pushing that number up. They want to get the cheapest prices possible for it and kind of push that to the end consumer. But if you kind of flip that on its head and say, okay, we're actually holding something really solid on our balance sheet now, we can focus more on quality, we can focus more on innovation. And I just see that it's going to be a much better side of things here for both the business and the consumer. But the path to get there, I think, is going to be very windy, and it's going to require a significant guidance to kind of help them understand where we are, why that's a problem, and why Bitcoin is the solution to that. So it's crazy to me, just like the dynamic of this whole thing over this next few decades is going to be wild.
Totally agree. I think that something that you said there about from the income statement to the balance sheet, I think there is this view, as we know, fiat makes the time preference, lower time preference with Bitcoin. So thinking more long term, and the income statement is really just quarter by quarter, maybe year by year. And so I think that's an interesting perspective you bring, right? Really thinking about what's the long term value creation for the business rather than hitting quarterly targets.
Yeah, I see it like in my past life. As I said, I was an accountant, and where I'm from here, it's very agricultural focused. And so I love relating things to like farmers. And I think that farmers actually focus more on the balance sheet. I think that they're like a subset of the population in terms of like corporations that focus more on their balance sheet than they do like the sales of their crops and stuff like that. And I see that most companies are going to evolve in a very similar way, where farmers aren't necessarily concerned with how much they made this year or last year. It's all very cyclical and it changes. But the thing that they're really focused on is building their balance sheet, building land for the next 20, 30 years. And I really think that Bitcoin's going to do the same thing to corporations and businesses in the future. They're going to think a lot more long-term. They're going to focus on acquiring more land, just like farmers do in terms of the digital landscape. But that just has a trickle-down effect on the businesses themselves, plus the end consumer, I think, is going to be a big beneficiary of that over time.
Cool.
So there's so many things at play here with Bitcoin. I think we should kind of switch focus to the energy side of things. I will kind of preface this with before I got into Bitcoin, I knew zero about energy. I knew that when I turned on the light switch, the lights came on, but it's very much shifted my mindset of that everything in life is energy, and Bitcoin. And we've never, as a species and planet Earth here, we've never really had we've never unlocked is it the Kardashev scale? Like we've never gotten past like the very bottom of that. But I think that Bitcoin is going to bring us to that next level and beyond that. So I'm interested, as an energy guy, just kind of give us your take on Bitcoin and what kind of implications it's going to have on our future for energy.
Yeah, well, I think, long-term Kardashev scale, I haven't done as much thinking. I mean, I think we're going to lead that direction, and I think Bitcoin will probably play a big role in getting us there faster. But if I think about the more here and now, what are the problems that our current energy system faces? We want to have more renewables. Renewables has benefits over fossil fuels, even if you don't bring the carbon dioxide element into it. Mm-hmm. Just having something that is not, more finite, right? So I think there isn't. I don't see us running out of oil and gas resources on the planet, but we're going to move to more and more marginal types of resources, right? And there's going to be, in one hand, I think our innovation will bring those costs down as they get more exploited, but it does lead to problems. There are environmental issues with hydrocarbons, right? So we want to move to more renewable sources. I would put nuclear into that camp as well. I do think nuclear big role, even though it's not it does use uranium, which itself is also maybe not necessarily renewable, but we don't have a huge shortage of uranium. Mm-hmm. But I think the issue with the renewables is, of course, aspects of the economics are not great. There is intermittency. And then sometimes, the source is not close to the demand, right? And I think Bitcoin mining helps bridge it, such that provides a bridge by providing an additional source of revenue to these projects that can then enable profitability, that can then bring more energy to more people, can increase the renewable share in the overall system, and can handle issues, can resolve some of these issues where we have cyclicity, where we have maybe more power being created than the grid can take, that can be offsourced into a mining rig to generate Bitcoin. So that will also reduce the burden that is put onto grids and the costs associated with maintaining those grids. So I think there's like really practical solutions that Bitcoin brings in the kind of short to medium term. And I think it's just a matter of orange pilling, the companies that own these types of assets, right? So the existing large power generation companies, the renewable energy infrastructure players, power transmission grid operators. I think the thing is that they're probably not aware that the benefits. And I think the problem is, even just a couple of years ago, everybody's saying that Bitcoin's terrible for the environment, mm-hmm. for whatever reasons, right? So I think we've had to kind of fight with just kind of going against the negative sentiment. That now I think people will be more ears open to think about, okay, how can this actually be a solution that I can integrate into my infrastructure business?
Yeah, so just kind of hearing that as I'm sure most people in the audience here are like, there's a lot there, and I think that it can be pretty overwhelming to listen to where we are in terms of energy and kind of see it into the future. But just maybe from an energy company's perspective, like think about yourself as an energy company. Like if you were talking to an energy company, what would you tell them in terms of like how could Bitcoin directly benefit them right now?
Yeah, and I think it depends on what types of assets they have, whether they're into the renewable infrastructure space, like wind farms and solar farms, mm-hmm. or if they're into the more traditional fossil fuel space. But let's start with the fossil fuels players, right? Like one of the major issues they face is flare gas, right? So you might have, if you look at the west coast of Africa right now, for example, they produce a lot of oil off the coast of Nigeria, the Nigerian Delta, but there's no infrastructure to take that gas to any sort of market onshore.
Right.
So they just burn the gas. In some cases, they re-inject it, right? But they're basically just burning gas. What if you could say, okay, you don't have to burn this gas. You can actually use the energy that we produced in a generator to then power mining rig that would then generate revenue from this asset, right? So you're turning something that was effectively a liability into a revenue generating asset. And then, okay, all of a sudden now you have Bitcoin on your balance sheet. Then you kind of become a Bitcoin miner, and you have the question, okay, how much of this do I hold on my balance sheet versus sell to deal with cost? And I think through that journey, they would become a little bit of orange pill, thinking about, okay, fiat, Bitcoin, which is the better money? What do I want to hold? What do I want to spend? And then I think it opens up a whole nother set of doors and discussions about the longer term view of Bitcoin, especially as more and more companies start kind of moving into this space and holding Bitcoin as a treasury asset. So that's one example. I think it would be a different factor for a company that maybe has wind assets that are sometimes
what about them?
Electricity. Yeah, during peak periods here in Denmark, there's more electricity generated than the grid can handle. So similarly, say, okay, during those periods of time, instead of shutting down your turbines, you just direct the excess power to a rig, run the rig, generate additional revenue, increases your economics. And again, you're in that same position. Now you have Bitcoin as an asset. What do you do with it? It starts opening up new questions, new opportunities, and new strategies.
So that makes so much sense to me. And that's one of the things I'm most excited about, because that's such a huge industry, is the energy. Like, everything in life is energy. And so I'm interested to kind of hear your perspective on this, because this is something I think a lot about. And I don't understand energy in the same level as you do, but this is just kind of at a very basic level. This is how I kind of see it here. So where I live, we have a whole bunch of hydropower, like water. There's up north. I mean, if you look at Canada itself, I think that like 90% of the population is within like 100 miles of the American border. So everything's very south, but up north, there's just a ton of natural resources up there and a lot of hydropower. And kind of how I see this myself is, like, if you think about it today, like if you were to go build something in terms of infrastructure up north, first of all, it costs a ton. Like, just to even think about it, before you even get the thought in your head, it's like millions and millions of dollars. Then you got to find people to get up there, and then you kind of have to build everything out, and then you have to generate the energy, but then you have to send it somewhere. So energy only travels so far. Electricity only travels so far. So that it's up there, like the resources are up there, but we have no ability without Bitcoin mining to actually capture that energy. Whereas if you throw a Bitcoin miner on there, all of a sudden you don't have to send that energy anywhere. You can just turn that directly into money now. So that shifts the whole investment, the infrastructure, and then kind of instead of having to build something around it and then you can kind of have it there and then build around it afterwards. And that's kind of how I see it with Northern Canada, Greenland, Africa, as you alluded to, I think is going to be a big part of that as well. But does that make sense, or am I kind of out to lunch with that?
No, it totally makes sense. And it's kind of, that position of like the energy sources are not always where the demand is, right? So now we're bringing demand to the source of the energy, right? And I think that's great. And those will tend to be the lowest cost sources, right? So you find large untapped potential of energy, and that will then should decarbonize the Bitcoin network in the process of doing that. And I think the other thing you bring up is this, transmitting electricity, huge amounts of losses even today. I don't know what the exact number is. It's been a few years since I looked at it, but I think it's something like 30% of all of the power that's generated in the world is wasted through transmission losses. So there's a huge amount of loss there. So again, there's probably an optimization that Bitcoin mining will bring as you strategically locate these things in the different positions of the grid. They could then minimize how much losses we see in the grid.
Yeah, that's okay. So that does make sense to me then, because I guess the other side of that too that I kind of forgot to mention there was that, assuming you did put the infrastructure there, you had the investment, there's a lot of energy out there. So you would either have two options there. You either like build a community around that to support or to have the demand for that energy that you could sell to those consumers locally, or you would have to send it somewhere. And you're saying that like 30% of it overall is lost, but imagine having to send it way up there to whoever needs it down here. Like I think that it'd be a lot more than 30% lost there. So all of a sudden, like Bitcoin to me is like the first asset that's ever existed where you can convert natural resources like water, like methane gas, like anything. You can, instead of having to sell that energy to somebody, Bitcoin is the buyer of that, and you can convert that directly into money. Like that's just such a huge thing to me. That's the unlock with Bitcoin to me.
Yeah, and I think it totally totally agree with you. And I think the cool thing is in Africa, when you look there, right? So there's been, there's 1 billion people. I think there's been another 1 billion coming into Africa over the next century, right? And this quality of life is still super low there, primarily because they don't have physical infrastructure. And it's so difficult to get the economics to make sense to build additional infrastructure in those places. And it's been partly addressed through like decentralized, like solar panels in little villages. But Bitcoin can help solve this problem as well, because now you have another source of revenue. Besides just, you might be able to fund the infrastructure through Bitcoin, the Bitcoin they're going to mine, and then divert a portion of that into local communities, right? So that you're not relying only on, these poor communities that don't have a lot of wealth. They can't really afford a huge amount to basically pay off high enough prices that will pay off the capital investment, that they can become like a byproduct beneficiary of the new infrastructure that's built primarily for the purposes of Bitcoin mining.
Yes. Yeah. And so maybe let's go in that direction then, because that's kind of another one of my theories, is that because of what's happening here with the world, with technology, like I really think that over the next couple decades, like less and less people are going to be working, not because they don't want to, but because technology is going to replace their job. Like I've seen it myself in the last year or two, of just the power of AI and how it actually replaces somebody who I would have paid a couple $1,000s. I could have that within a couple seconds just on the, so I think that as we shift toward less people working, that means that governments are going to be earning less taxes, right? So I think that kind of what you're alluding to there with Africa, in the sense that not only are they changing the way they invest in their infrastructure and subsidize the cost of that, but I think that that's actually going to be able to subsidize income taxes in the future. So that's kind of my theory. And I think that Trump sees this. He's been talking about getting rid of tax on tips, on Social Security, on veterans. I see that income tax is going down, and instead of taxing human resources, they're actually going to be able to utilize natural resources to fund. So as governments shrink, as less and less people are paying taxes, I think that Bitcoin mining will be kind of the subsidy to keep things going here, which is really exciting to me, because when you don't have to rely on humans to earn or to pay your taxes or to fund your government and fund your projects, that becomes super interesting to me when you can actually use a volcano or hydropower or anything that is just abundant out there, but we've never been able to capture that before Bitcoin.
Really cool. Yeah, no, I think in general, and so again, it'd be interesting to see. I'm not a tax expert. I don't know how much different. It's very complicated, obviously, revenue sources, not just income taxes, but capital gains and all that. I do tend to agree with you in the sense that we are, we've lived in a society where we've always thought that taxation is a necessity. And I'd like to believe that there's a future where it's not.
Agreed.
Or if there is taxation, it's done in ways that are really, we're discouraging things that are unhealthy in people's lifestyles or something like that, right? Taxes on things like cigarettes, allow people to smoke, but maybe tax that, alcohol. But I think in general, what we're going to see is that, governments will have to spend within their means. They're not going to be able to use the money printer. They're going to have to rely on whatever they can generate, either through taxation or through other asset sources. And I think that's just going to create much less waste, much greater use of productivity. And instead of just wasting people's time to do non-productive things, people either have more leisure time or be working on things that are productive, right? Because I think right now it's the worst of both worlds, right? We're forcing people to work in jobs that are not necessary simply because governments need to spend more money to boost GDP in the short term, right? Just to keep people employed. So I think we have the wrong metrics that governments are going after and the wrong tools and so forth. So I do think Bitcoin will resolve many of these factors, and again, to the net benefit of just general humanity and citizens, either more leisure, better quality of life, more meaningful work. And so I think working less, being replaced, probably will be a good thing, because we can focus on things that are more meaningful to us.
Fully agree with that. And to me, that's so exciting. I think that you brought up a really good point there in terms of the waste, like between just government employees, like their day to day. I think that, you know, getting a budget and saying this is what we spent last year. If we don't spend that again, we're going to lose some of that funding. Like there's just so much waste. All the incentives are completely broken. The cool thing about that, I think, is that it's got to the point where it's so bad that we're just kind of going to, you know, start from the ashes almost. And I think that without Bitcoin, I think we'd be in a lot of trouble. So, you know, thank God for Bitcoin in that sense. But Ted, like, do you have a time limit here? I don't want to.
Maybe another 5 minutes. I have to run to meet a friend.
Okay, good thing I asked.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll. Did I have any more questions here that I wanted to ask you? There was I had a lot of different things, but what we talked about all the great things with Bitcoin, and I'm always interested to hear from people who have spent a lot of time actually learning Bitcoin, understanding it. What do you have any concerns with Bitcoin? Like, do you have anything that keeps you up at night in terms of maybe not your stack, but in terms of Bitcoin overall?
Okay, so there's a few things, right? And again, I don't know if I'd say it keeps me up at night, but there are these risks that I haven't fully understood if they're an issue or not, right? So one is the quantum computing. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I know there's been all over the news recently, but I know even before this big wave of Google coming out with their, or IBM, I can't remember who it was now, with their results in the quantum space, there's that question of can SHA-256 be hacked from quantum, and to what extent can the Bitcoin network kind of, you know, defend against that? Another one that I don't know if it's just it is a risk at all or not, but you know, I talked to my dad. He's like, what if, you know, the poles of the Earth reverse? We're behind due. It's supposed to happen every 35,000 years or something. It hasn't happened. That would mean all electricity shuts down temporarily in the world. I think. I don't know if it's just AC or both AC and DC, but the whole network, the whole Bitcoin network, could theoretically go down across the world all at once, and that would mean a reset to the whole Bitcoin network. So I think that's one other one. Then there's the mining pool concentration, and can that hijack the network if some nefarious actors were to get too much of the mining pool? And then there's the question about, you know, the custodians kind of replicating what was done with gold back in the day, where we maybe not all of us, but the bulk of humanity finds it easier to rely on a custodian versus their self-custody, and that kind of leads us down the fractional reserve path that gold-backed dollars went down and ultimately led to fiat problem in the first place. And if we recycle that vicious circle, so I think those are just my like kind of list of the risks as I see it with Bitcoin.
So what would happen there? Because you said that we would pretty much have to start from scratch with Bitcoin. It's tough to say 35,000 years. Are we going to, like, is it going to be on the date? Is it going to be on the year? Is it going to be within like 1,000 years?
Well, so apparently we're already over, and I put 35,000. I can't remember what the exact number is, but we're like overdue by like at least thousands of years. So it could happen, and apparently it does happen like instantaneously. So my dad's a geologist, by the way, so he's kind of, you know, you can see these things in the geological records where there was these kind of reversal of the poles. So they're quite regular. And I think physicists know that the magnetic field of the Earth they know what will happen in terms of the magnetic field of the Earth and stuff. But again, nobody can predict exactly when it would happen. So it might not happen for another 50,000 years, in which case, I guess who cares? But it could happen tomorrow as well.
What would happen with that, though, with Bitcoin?
Well, if it is indeed the case that all electricity would shut down, again, I haven't kind of gone through the whole thought process, but my understanding would be all Bitcoin mining would cease to operate. But then I don't know, like, would it be a situation where, because, you know, when the poles reverse again into the new orientation, you could reconfigure electricity to flow again in the opposite direction, and then get your laptops and devices up and running again. And if the Bitcoin protocol was still, and the ledgers were still on people's devices, maybe it would just start up again. But I don't know. And that's where I'm like not a technical enough expert. So it'd be great to, you know, speak with somebody who really understands the nuts and bolts of the protocol to be able to answer that question.
Yeah. And to me, I think that would be, if you ask anybody, even Bitcoiners, people think that one day, I don't know what's going to happen, but whether it's like a solar flare, whether it's an EMP, whether it's the poles reversing, the power is going to go out. But to me, like the fact that the way the Bitcoin ecosystem, the network works, is that the copy of this ledger for the last 870,000 blocks, that's within 20,000 plus devices around the world. So we would have that starting point there, at least to build off of. I don't know what would happen in the meantime, obviously, unless there's, some satellite mining Bitcoin in space, it would probably be on pause for a while. But the nice thing about that is we have like 20,000 computers that we could reach out to and say, okay, well, let's start again. But we know all the balances and who owns them and who has your keys would still work when the power came back on, I think. But if you compare that to like the financial system itself, like what happens with that? If the power went out in a centralized spot, whether it was something like this or a different attack, I just don't see them restoring the balances in a way that Bitcoin could.
Yeah, it should be trustworthy. If we can all agree that we would use that opportunity to resurrect the old ledger versus starting something new, then I think you're probably right? But I guess it would be that decision point to make sure that the miners that then jack up first would be able to honor the
existing
vertical ledger.
Yeah, because that's kind of what I've heard is even if every node went out on planet Earth, like if it was something like that, I think that there's a satellite in space, and I forget who the company is who does it, but they actually run a node from space.
Oh, no
so
way.
Even if something happened down here, and you still wouldn't really want to rely on one party for that would kind of defeat the purpose of Bitcoin. But still, at least you'd have something. And you're right. We would all have to agree with it.
It's cool that we can do that, right? Because that means if we can get 5 or 6 of them up there with different, companies and stuff, then we have some degree of decentralization that we all can kind of believe in. And that would be potentially, good mitigation against all those sorts of risks, solar flares, EMPs, pulse reversing. It's funny that we talk about these things, right? Because I don't think I would have otherwise cared about these things in my life.
Yeah, no doubt. FutureStack said is Blockstream. That's who I thought it was too. Space node Blockstream. I'm pretty sure, anyways.
That's Adam back.
Somebody's definitely running a node from space. So I think that's a pretty good call out to people, just to ensure that, if something does happen here, I think the more nodes we have in terms of as you mentioned, I think more people running nodes pretty much counters a lot of those risks that you shared in terms of mining centralization. I know that the nodes doesn't really tie in directly with the mining stuff, but I think that the more we can decentralize this thing, the more it reduces the risks of these type of scenarios, from my mind anyways. So I guess maybe we'll leave it there, Ted. I think that you and I, we were kind of talking last week. I think we're going to be doing some work together in the future. So this probably won't be the last time, hopefully, that the audience sees you here. But I appreciate you coming on. It's always nice to talk to other Bitcoiners who are kind of at the same level or above, or, ish. I just think that it's a really good way to, figure out what other people are wondering about and maybe bring some clarity to a few things for certain people. And do you have any final thoughts? Do you want any actionable items for people, and where can people find you if they want to keep in touch after this?
Yeah, no specific action items. I mean, first of all, just feeling entirely neutral. I mean, it's been great to be on. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks to your audience for listening as well. Look forward to doing more of this together in the future. I think it's great, as you say, just to kind of hear other Bitcoiners' perspectives and hopefully each of us are a little bit smarter at the end of this conversation from the discussion we've had. And if people want to find me right now, I'm on X. It's at Ruxpin84, RUXPIN 84. So you can find me there. Reach out if you want to connect. I try to post articles daily on different Bitcoin related thoughts. So
nice.
So, look forward to seeing you guys. I'm going to head out and enjoy the weekend. Wish you all a great weekend when you guys get there.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ted. I'll shoot you a message after this, and we'll get that info I'll put in the show notes just in case people want to find you in there. So thanks for coming on, my friend. Have a great weekend, and I'm going to keep the party rolling here. I got a couple minutes, so thanks, Ted. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, everybody, for being here for that. That was awesome. I love just chatting with Bitcoiners. It is something I want to do more of, and not so much in the typical fashion. I always try to do things a little bit differently on this channel. I try to anyways, try my best. But it's just nice for me to hear another perspective on things, to get, because it's easy to have a bunch of opinions and theories on things, but maybe that just makes sense to you, and somebody with more intelligence than you might think you're a dipshit, as Kyle here alluded to earlier. Good morning, dipshits. Where was that? Or Matt, sorry, it was Matt. So anyways, the point is, I love talking to Bitcoiners without an agenda. I think that's the thing. With some of the bigger channels and stuff, you never know who's paying to be on there. You never know what the angle is. This is just two people trying to figure things out here, with a bunch of people in the chat as well, trying to do the same thing. So at the end of the day, that's really all we're doing here, is just trying to get through this whole crazy time in history together. And I'm sorry I haven't been keeping up with the zaps here. I wanted to just focus on the conversation there. But we do have quite a few here for Fat Zap Friday. So we got TDBTC. That looks like a Gladiator 300. Zapped 888 sats, our favorite number. We got Spaceman who zapped 200 sats. Letha, 2.1 thousand sats. Daniel with 888. Fat Zap Friday. My Path to Fire, 888 sats. Bodie with 1,000, Plunger with 300, and Duncan with 888 sats. So lots of 888s in there. Oh, and Wood Butcher, 1,000 sats. So thank you, everybody. That's a big day over in the zaps. And if you want to, did I miss any from YouTube? Yeah, we had another 888, and that's it. So we only got one zap today from the YouTube one, but I spent like the first half without it on there. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I think we're going to spend probably the next, I would say, I got about 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe I'll find some videos or something in the email that I wanted to talk about. But in the meantime, toss some topics in the chat, and we'll spend a little bit of time here together. If you guys are up for that, we'll give away a little bit of Bitcoin too, courtesy of our friends at Bitcoin Well. All right. Well, we got Duchess with the super chat today. Thanks, Jor. Enjoyed the guest today. I'm glad. Not only different Bitcoiners, but different Bitcoiners in different parts of the world. There's a lot of things as he was talking I wanted to get to, but I understand that time is of the essence. Time is scarce, and so it's super interesting to me to talk to people around the world. We talked about waste. We talked a little bit about what Bitcoin is going to unlock here for the world in terms of energy. But I also think that Bitcoin is going to unlock so much more in terms of like the global economy. And the internet kind of did that 20 years ago in terms of the fact that Ted and I can even have a conversation from different parts of the world. And I think we kind of take that for granted a lot of days. But at the same time, even with the pandemic, you think back like 5 years ago before the pandemic and think about how far away we were from where we are today. Like using Zoom, using like platforms like this, it was all very foreign to people. And I think that after the pandemic, when people were forced to work from home, people were forced to connect through this weird webcam here, it kind of changed the landscape of everything. And so when you mix the internet in there, unlocking the ability for people to communicate back and forth. And then when you toss in Bitcoin, where you have the ability to send value to anybody else on earth for a very low fee and rate and very quickly, that changes everything. That changes everything. And I think that that's one of the things I say within Bitcoin here is that it's an unlock to the future. And it truly is. So I'm going to give away some free bitty here for people. Courtesy of the Well. How are we doing for price today? I saw that we were at 102. Oh, fuck. Oops. 102 this morning. So is it happening here? Is it happening? Is this Wall Street kind of getting ready for, we're on 104 now. All right. Well, don't fall asleep. Don't fall asleep on Bitcoin here. Okay, let's go to Bitcoin Well here. So again, I've seen a couple people signed up in the last couple days here for Bitcoin Well. But again, if you are from Canada, if you're from the US, make sure you get yourself a Bitcoin Well account. As Arnie walks away, he didn't want to hear about Bitcoin Well. But you get 5 free tosses into the well. And again, Bitcoin Well is Team Bitcoin. They've been around for a very long time. They actually have a stock that you can buy on the stock market. I am an owner of Bitcoin Well. I'm a shareholder. I believe so much in what they're doing, between focusing on Bitcoin only, between building out the tools on their website that's going to bring more people here. If people only knew how many features are available on Bitcoin Well compared to literally every other platform out there, people are just going to migrate there. And think about it from Bitcoin Well's perspective. Every time somebody buys or sells Bitcoin, they're taking a small cut of that. So if you think about like bank stocks through the years and how well they did, how not as volatile as like a MicroStrategy would be, but just like a very consistent flow of money here that they can convert into Bitcoin. And the fact that they are Bitcoin, I think that they're going to grow much faster than a lot of the companies in the traditional system. So I am a shareholder in Bitcoin Well. I'm not telling you to invest in Bitcoin Well, but I am telling you to try out their product because it is the best one that I've found in my time within Bitcoin. So this is Bitcoin Well, and somebody this morning is going to win some free biddy. So let's get to it. Ready? Set? Go. $210 sats for some lucky soul out there today. I got to plug my phone and I didn't plug it in last night. I always leave my charger here in the office. And so when I wake up, I have like 15%. Anyways, congrats to whoever just got 210 pieces of the future finite wealth of the world. And again, test out Bitcoin Well. If you try out Bitcoin Well and you send me an email and you said, Bitcoin Well sucks, I hate it, I tried it, never using it again, I will send you some of my own sats. Actually, I shouldn't say that because they're not even my company. I just love them. I'm obviously a believer in them, big fan of them, love what they do. And they don't pay me anything. I just like to, I like to talk about the products that I use and the ones that benefit me most within Bitcoin. So let's, MicroStrategy's pumping too. That's good news. I had some money that was tied up. I sent it mid-December from my online banking to my investment account because I wanted to buy some more MicroStrategy. And it sat there till yesterday, one whole month. One whole month it sat there. And it was something to do with my name. Like I know I go by Jor on here, but I have my real name is different than the name that I go by. Jor is actually my middle name. I'll just say that. But anyway, so I've sent hundreds of transfers to these guys over the last 15 years, but they decided to just stop this one for a month. And so finally went through. I emailed them a bunch of times. I called them a bunch of times. And to me, that just shows me how much these guys are going to get left behind. A month to receive my money and to fund my account. 1 month, 30 days. So anyways, it showed up there yesterday. I got one more share of MicroStrategy, and which is going to be 10 shares in probably a year and then 100 shares in another year. Right? So we got another zap here. This one's from Duchess to Arnie and the Rescue Dogs from Lucky the Dog. So we had a super chat and a zap from Duchess. And so thanks for pulling the weight around here. All-time high for inauguration day. What is the all-time high even? We got to be getting close to it now. What is the all-time high? I want to say 105. Doesn't say. Oh, 108. Okay, so we got a little ways to go. We got a little ways to go here. All right. So I got a busy day today. I got a nice fun day. I'm actually hopping on a podcast in 30 minutes from now with a lady named Paula. So I'm going to go on her channel and talk about Bitcoin. Hopefully get a few more Bitcoiners within the space here. And then we got our Bitcoin Amigo show today at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So what did I miss here? It says Duchess interesting. Didn't know that. What did I miss? Okay. Where is this? I missed a few things here from Duchess. Okay, let me go back to this. Even though he's not here anymore, so this is kind of shitty to do. But I mean, it's important. This is why the comments exist. This is why we do the shows live, and we welcome disagreements around here. Unless you're being a dipshit, then you get a timeout. So Duchess says, hate to contradict a guest, but that is not true. Pole magnetic reversal will not almost certainly take hundreds of years, and we will have lots of other very significant challenges during that time. Will not almost, okay. I'm thinking they meant will certainly take hundreds of years to do. Okay, so that's interesting. Let me restate. Pole reversal is probably happening now, but almost certainly will take hundreds, if not thousands of years. I gotcha. It will have no effect on electrical power or transmission networks. Okay. It's interesting. CMEs are a much more significant problem. Huh. Interesting. Well, I mean, I've never even heard of that before. So just, even though we might disagree, even though he might have said one thing, Duchess says another thing, I think the point of these type of discussions is just to even bring light to it. Like, I had no idea that was even a thing that happened. So I learned something today. And anytime you can learn something, I would say that that's a successful day to me. Yeah. Do we have any insights for the polls? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen here. Duncan says Trump wants 150K. I think Trump wants much more than that. And that's the exciting thing for me, is that Trump, if you look at Trump's track record, like, the cool thing now is that this is no longer a hypothetical. And I think that that's why there's a whole lot less pushback this time around with Trump, is because when he first took office, people were just like losing their minds. They're like, this guy's going to unleash the nukes. This guy's going to bomb every country. This guy's going to start civil war. This guy's going to fire every person that's not white and every woman out there. And it's like, now we have precedent. 4 years was the most peaceful time in U.S. history, and the economy was booming. But Trump actually measured his success off of the stock market. And I didn't know this, but apparently on successful stock market trading days, Trump would actually sign the paper for the day, like the summary, and send it out to the brokers on Wall Street. So he measures his whole success based on the economy. And so when he's really dialing in on one thing, which is Bitcoin in this case, like, what do you think is going to happen here? Not only is he going to just like let things flow more freely, reduce the red tape, reduce the regulations on some bullshit, but he's going to be an advocate for it because he wants Bitcoin to succeed. He wants to claim, even though we know that it won't have anything to do with him, but he wants to claim the Trump pump, we'll call it. Like, that's how Trump is. Not my opinion on that, right? So let's, I'm excited. As I said at the start of the show, like, I've been waiting a very long time for what's about to happen here. I didn't know if it would ever come. And all of a sudden we're here now. Okay. BTC says, this is Tom. I thought I recognized that avatar there. I'm not sure why my display name doesn't show up. It does on my screen. Anyone know why? Oh, okay. Spaceman says, I see you as Tom in the chat. I see it as TDBTC. But that's okay. That's all right. Amigos will be lit today. And there was a fat zap here that came in while I was blabbing there. 2,000 888 sats from this QR code here. So they bypassed the Zap stream today, but that's okay. All the sats are the same to me. So thank you for that. I do have a little bit more time here, so let's keep this party going here. I'm kind of warmed up right now. I kind of feel like I want to talk about this subject that I meant to talk about yesterday. What do we think about that? Do we got a little bit more time? Yeah, let's do it. I don't think this will take longer than 10 minutes. I was not prepared for this, but I do feel warmed up to talk about this right now. So what I'm going to talk about today here, I'm going to clip this after the show some point today. And I want you just to send this out to a couple people, share it on your socials. I want to keep this about 10 or 15 minutes long, but I just want you to post it on there. You don't have to put like a comment or anything with it. Just share it. And maybe I'll do my best to like put a good thumbnail and a good title that will actually entice people to watch it. But I'm going to be talking about comparing Nvidia stock to Bitcoin. And if you think about pretty much any person within the Western world right now, if they have a pension, whether they know it or not, probably a significant amount of that pension is actually allocated to companies like Nvidia. And we've seen what Nvidia has done for the last couple of years. Like, it's been astronomical. I think it's the only one that's actually outperformed Bitcoin. I think. I could be wrong. I don't know the story here. The point is that I think that a lot of people are invested in Nvidia one way or the other, whether they know it or not, through index funds, through their pension fund. All these big funds include these magnificent seven in their indexes, right? So I want to compare Nvidia, both the numbers and the bigger picture here of what's happening. So let's maybe start with the numbers. About six months ago on this show, we did a comparison of Bitcoin to Microsoft. And we looked at the PE ratio of Microsoft. So I got a spreadsheet here that I'm going to bring up from that time. So this is from Microsoft at the time that I did this. This is an old spreadsheet, but I think it's still relevant for comparison here. So this is how we're calculating the, where are we here? I don't want to confuse people here, but this is basically what the PE ratio is. So the price, that's what somebody pays to own a share. That's the share price divided by the earnings, the after tax of what the company will produce in 1 year. So we looked at Microsoft here. We had at the time, the market cap of Microsoft was 2.73 trillion. Their earnings were 75 billion. And so their PE ratio was about 36.4, which if you look at the average of the stock market right now, I'd say the average is around 20, 25. So you have to wonder why Microsoft is higher than that. Why are people paying more of a premium? And just for like a very basic understanding of this, it basically suggests if you were to buy one share, how many years would it take to essentially recover your investment? In this case, it's 36 years. So if you bought one share in Microsoft, based on the company's performance, it would take 36 years to recoup that investment, 100% of it. So why would somebody do that? Well, number one, there's not a whole lot of other options out there. But number two, the way these big companies, the Mag 7 works is like Microsoft. They have a ton of just passive investments from people's retirement funds. So the amount of inflows just by being in like the top 100 or in some of these big indexes, the passive flows into this. That's what creates these premiums on the Microsofts, on these Nvidias, on these shares. So again, you buy one share of Microsoft, it's going to take you 36 years at this time. It's probably changed a little bit from now. 36 years to recoup that cost. So let's look at this. So we're going to compare that to Bitcoin right now. So the highest return, just like this is an average, is 178%. The lowest, I think this is over like a 4-year average. So of course you've seen some outliers within Bitcoin where it's like 50,000% a year. but this is like a 4-year rolling average. You looked at Bitcoin performance over any 4 years, the highest annual return is 178. The lowest is 24%. So conservatively, I mean, you go with 50. So which creates a PE ratio of 2, which means that if you bought Bitcoin, it would take you 2 years to recoup the cost that you paid. So compare that to 36, which Microsoft had. 36 years. Bitcoin historically, 4-year average is 2 years. That's conservatively. And if you look at like what the normal person would say, maybe 60%, that's what Saylor goes with, 60% annual return, but 75 even. So that's a PE ratio of 1.33. In other words, you want your PE ratio to be very low. The lower it is, the faster you get your investment back. So how much would you pay for a share of Microsoft? So the stock price at this time was $405 and the PE ratio is 36. That means that the actual price that somebody should pay for this stock is $11 based on their earnings. And it's 405. So let's go over to Nvidia. This is even crazier. So again, we're going to use the same numbers here. 4 years, the highest was 178, the lowest was 24% from Bitcoin. And so we're going to go with these two kind of numbers here. The PE ratio conservatively, 2 years or 2. And then what a normal person would consider to be the average, 75%. So a PE ratio of 1.33. So how much would somebody pay for Nvidia? So the stock price of Nvidia right now is $136. Their PE ratio is 53.6. So you can type these into your AI, your Google right now. You can say, what's the stock price of Nvidia? I did this a couple of days ago, so it might be a little bit different. But you can type in, what's the PE ratio of Nvidia? 53. 53. So you buy one share in Nvidia, it's going to take you 53 years to recoup that investment. Not recoup it, but to get 100% of it back. So this is what, based on that, this is what the actual price of Nvidia should be, $2 a share. If the stock market wasn't incredibly manipulated, if the stock market wasn't based entirely on future potential, if there wasn't so many passive inflows from capital with no other way to nowhere else to go, the fair price of Nvidia stock would be $2.50. And so then you compare it to Bitcoin. You say, okay, well, Bitcoin's like the best performing asset, and we're saying that Bitcoin is a 2 PE ratio, then it should be $5 a share if you're comparing it directly to Bitcoin. So that's the PE ratio. That's how out of whack that is. But if we think about, these are the things that I really want to dial in on if you're comparing Nvidia to Bitcoin. So let's look at if you had two choices, if you had some capital and you're looking at buying either Nvidia or you're looking at buying some Bitcoin. These are a few things that I want to point out, aside from like the PE ratio and the actual historical performance of these two assets and the earnings of these. I mean, Bitcoin doesn't have earnings, so it's not a really apples to apples comparison here, but you can still say if you invest $1 in Bitcoin, it's going to take you 2 years to get that dollar back 100%. So there's no products, there's no services, but that has been the historical return of Bitcoin. So let's look at the competitors here with Nvidia. What does Nvidia do? They create, they're like an AI company, right? They create technology. I mean, maybe let's just check with AI to see what Nvidia's actual, selling point is. What does Nvidia do? So it says, Nvidia is a technology company that specializes in designing advanced graphic processing units, GPUs, and AI technologies. So their core business area is developing high-performance GPUs for gaming, professional workstations, and data centers, creating AI hardware and software solutions, and producing specialized computing platforms for various industries. Okay, so these guys, they're competitors. Think about who would be a competitor in that world. You're up against the Googles, you're up against Apple, you're up against IBM. You got a lot of competition. Some very very capital intensive industry here. Like if you look at the Meg 7, they're all tech stocks. So competitors are high, very high. Nvidia, their competitors are here, and they will continue to grow, in my opinion, as technology improves, and as we shift away from like the 10,000 employee companies to like, you look at Tether, there's like 20 people that run a $10 billion per year business. So the competitors are going to grow in this space. Who's a competitor to Bitcoin? Gold? Ethereum? XRP? So Bitcoin has, in my eyes, no competition. I mean, to most people, though, they would see Bitcoin as gold would be a number one competitor. Real estate would be another competitor. Stores of value would be a competitor to Bitcoin. But in my eyes, Bitcoin is the best store of value. Supply chain. I mean, we can start with Bitcoin here. Bitcoin has no supply chain. I guess it's entirely dependent on the Bitcoin mining. And if we look at the supply chain of new Bitcoin here, let's take a look at the, if you guys think this is a good thing or a bad thing here, let's take a look at the hash rate. So I know that this isn't like a really great comparison or a great analogy, but I think it is very similar in terms of like how new Bitcoin are created, the mining. So you can see the hash rate here. This is the amount of people that are powering the Bitcoin network, that are securing the Bitcoin network, and who are competing to mine the next block, which creates new supply of Bitcoin. So this is around where Trump got into office last time. You can see we were pretty much flat, and we see what happened there. And then this is about when Space Force took over. I think it was June of 2019. So those are two pretty big areas within the hash rate that not a lot of people focus on there. But this is the supply chain, essentially, of Bitcoin. Looks pretty good to me. But let's talk about Nvidia. Nvidia's supply chain. They are totally reliant on chips to continue their business. They are fully reliant on their supply chain to create these chips. And I think the majority of them are made in Taiwan. And if you look at what's been going on between China and Taiwan over the last couple of years, I would say that their supply chain is a huge risk for Nvidia. Like if one of their data centers or production facilities gets blown up or taken over, that takes a huge hit to Nvidia. And I saw something just to show the magnitude of what Nvidia is right now. I think they were talking about it on the Quant Bros the other night, but they said that Nvidia in the last week has gone down, I think 5x the total market cap of MicroStrategy. So in 1 week, Nvidia's stock price went down 5x the total market cap of MicroStrategy. So that just goes to show how big this thing is, and how if something were to disrupt their supply chain, what could happen to their stock price and everybody who's affected by that. So I'd say this supply chain for Nvidia is a massive risk for them. The PE ratio we have already covered. It's like 50. What was it? 53 to 2. So who's winning all these so far? The competitor, Bitcoin, won that for sure. They're not competing against Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, IBM. Supply chain, Bitcoin wins that one every time. PE ratio, Bitcoin destroys that. And forced buyers, if you look at what's kind of held up the price of Nvidia from crashing, is the forced buyers. Because they're number one in terms of the stock market, that just has so much passive flows coming in just because they're number one. So a lot of the shareholders of Nvidia, they are forced buyers. It's not like they're excited about Nvidia. They're just forced to hold Nvidia through these different index funds. And if you compare that to Bitcoin, nobody's really forced to hold Bitcoin. It's totally voluntary. And in fact, even a lot of the companies that do want to hold Bitcoin, they can't. So if you compare those two, like Nvidia has all forced buyers for the most part, or people who don't really understand the ratios and other things involved here. Whereas Bitcoin, there's people dying to buy Bitcoin. That's why MicroStrategy has been so successful in being the highway that allows this capital to flow from these big funds into Bitcoin. So Bitcoin wins that too. And right now, Nvidia has 90% of the market share, 90%. So in terms of room for growth, if Nvidia had like 10, 15% and they were really on the up and up, that's a whole different story. But when you already have 90% of the market cap, what do you think the odds of going up versus going down would be from that? And if you compare that to Bitcoin in terms of the room of the growth, like just take a look in the mirror, ask yourself how many of your friends and family and people in your network actually not only own Bitcoin, but understand Bitcoin. So we have 1 million miles to go in Bitcoin, and Nvidia is pretty much topped out. They got 90% of the market share already in this market, in their industry. So to me, Bitcoin has way, way higher to grow. Custody of the asset. And a lot of people don't really give a shit about this, but a lot of people do. You can't take custody of your Nvidia shares. You see it on the screen, your broker handles it. We trust the fact that they actually have the shares and they're not being lent out and manipulated. But with Bitcoin, you can absolutely take custody of that asset. It's the only asset that you can actually truly own. So I do foresee a day in the future where as things progress here, as all these assets become tokenized, I do foresee a day where you'll be able to actually take custody of your Nvidia shares, but not today. So if we're talking about today, Bitcoin definitely has that as well. CEO risk. Bitcoin has no CEO. Bitcoin has no head that you can chop off. Bitcoin has no CEO that could be involved in a scandal or do something stupid or embezzle money or anything like that. Bitcoin has no CEO. There's no risk of somebody there's no human that could jeopardize Bitcoin. It's a network. It's not one CEO. It's not a board of directors. It is the Bitcoin network. One of the things that makes so much sense about Bitcoin is the fact that there is no company. There is nobody who can change the rules. There's nobody who can issue more shares. There's no CEO of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, to me, wins that one as well. And the worst part about Nvidia to me is that they have all this capital. They're in the tech space and they have zero Bitcoin. A lot of the robotics and products and services that Nvidia is actually creating are going to accept Bitcoin in the future. And Nvidia themselves has zero Bitcoin. So of course we can't really compare this. I don't think there is a winner here, but I will call this one WTF Nvidia. What are you doing? Bitcoin can't own Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is Bitcoin. Whereas Nvidia, they have a bunch of cash, they have a bunch of expectations, but in reality, they have a technology. They have 90% of the market already. They have a lot of risks in terms of what could go wrong, in terms of their CEO, in terms of their supply chain, in terms of their competition, moving faster and moving more methodically than them. So the number one asset for the majority of people, individuals, companies, index funds, is Nvidia. And if you compare it to Bitcoin, holding Bitcoin compared to Nvidia share, it's not even a close comparison. And I think that if people actually understood this, instead of just so passively trusting their advisors, trusting the system that they're in, I couldn't imagine what would happen if everybody on Earth looked at this objectively, saw this video essentially. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It makes zero sense. So not only is, you could say that Nvidia is either way overvalued, which it is with their PE ratio, but then what I'm more focused on is just how undervalued Bitcoin is. Because when you talk about gold as its main competitor, and it's eventually going to overtake gold in terms of market cap, But then you look at real estate, and then you look at like these companies like Nvidia, where a lot of this capital is currently being held. So that's kind of my that's what I want to get into today. It's pretty crazy. Again, and I want to give a shout out here to My Path to Fire. I see a lot of comments in there. I got about 7 minutes here. I knew I'd wait till the last minute here, push it as far as I can. But that's the analysis there. So I want to say thank you to, once again here, Locks Guy, who gifted another 10 88 Sats radio memberships on the channel. Very, very, very generous. Incredible, actually. So thank you for that. That's not the first one, not the second one. I think that's the third time that Locks Guy has purchased a bunch of memberships for people in the community here. So thank you for that. Yeah. Nvidia has a CEO who wears a leather jacket or a leather coat. He's cool. Yeah, and this is absolutely right. The supply, if we're talking about the supply chain here of Bitcoin, supply will always be the same, whatever the hash rate is. That's true, whether there's 1 miner or 1 million miners. But in terms of just like the overall security of the people giving a shit about the supply, it is directly tied, in my eyes, to the amount of people who are contributing there to the network. Braun, look at this. We got $5 super chat. Says, do you think the U.S. government will buy at these prices? I think they're hyping the market before a recession, then we'll buy on the way down without saying anything. I think that the U.S. government, if they're actually going to go ahead with this Bitcoin implementation and strategic reserve, I do think that they're going to be absolutely buying. Doesn't matter. That's the thing. Countries, especially like the U.S., who have the ability to print money, they are going to be totally price inelastic. Like, they're not going to care what it is. They're going to realize the scarcity of this thing, and they're going to pay whatever it costs. And that's going to be eventually when Nvidia figures this out, they're going to do the exact same thing. Apple's going to do the same thing. Facebook's going to do the same thing. Microsoft's going to do the same thing. Once they realize that they need this asset, they are completely price inelastic. And we've seen that from BlackRock in the last year. They're just getting as much as they can. And that's going to be the trend for countries and companies. Okay, I got to go. Where's the podcast today? So we got, I'm hopping on there right now. I don't know if it's live or not, actually. I should have probably checked that. But anyways, I think it's going to be recorded. It'll probably be released. I'll tell you where it is. But Bitcoin Amigos today is going to be at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So let's end with one of our favorite songs here from the Bitcoin Amigos, and that is the Ballad of Satoshi. Love the song. Very good meaning, very good message, and we're going to play out the song for the show today. So make sure you stop by today, bring yourself a beer or two, and join the Bitcoin Amigos at 4 p.m. Eastern time today. So thank you once again, everybody, for the zaps, for the super chats. It's incredible, the amount of support here from the community. It's hard to say thank you enough. So have yourselves a great Friday today, everybody. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you at 4 p.m. Eastern time today on the Bitcoin Amigos channel. Bye-bye.
He rode into town, a stranger unknown, where warlord Dollar sat high on his throne. The people were broken, their freedom denied, but Satoshi spoke truth and their hearts came alive. Oh, Satoshi, bold and true, filled with hope, a dream come true. His Bitcoin invention code filled with grace, a hero selfless, leaving no trace. Dollar laughed loud, he's nothing to fear, but the people grew strong as Satoshi drew near. They rose up together with Bitcoin in hand, and the dark days of Dollar could no